I grew up in a violent city. In fact, for a while, it was one of the most violent cities in the world. And anyone who has grown up in a violent city knows that it doesn't matter how smart you are, how safe you are, how careful you are. The best way to avoid danger is to be lucky. 8 years ago, on a Sunday like this, I was very lucky. My mom had sent me out to buy tortillas, but right before I left, she had found some in the fridge. So I didn't have to go. 10 minutes later, we heard gunshots. Turns out that right in front of the store that I was supposed to be going, there was a crossfire. I was very lucky because had my mom not found the tortillas in the fridge, I had walked right into a crossfire. The problem is that not everyone is lucky. And luck should never be the thing that decides who lives and who dies, not if we can do something about it. My name is Jorge Araujo. I'm Mexican and proud. And by the end of this talk, I want to have convinced you of two seemingly mutually exclusive things. That you should never buy illegal drugs, and that we should push for the legalization of them. Drugs have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, because I have seen the effects that they had had on my country, and I have seen the violence that brought to them. Mexico is the biggest exporter of drugs worldwide. Coincidentally enough, the US is the bigger market for drugs globally. So the pathway of illicit drugs from Mexico to the US are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And in Mexico, the criminal organizations that control these pathways are called cartels. Cartels are not only involved in drug trafficking, they're involved in other illegal enterprises, as extortion, human trafficking. They're involved in things such as illegal timberwood and even avocado. Drugs cartels are famous around the world because of their violent modus operandi. They're famous for their beheadings. They're famous for their mass killings. They're famous for literally melting corpse in acid. Cartels believe that fear and violence is the best way to assert dominions, both in their areas of influence and between themselves. In the 2000s, the levels of violence in Mexico got to a point that in 2006, the then President Felipe Calderón declared the war against drug trafficking, deploying the army effectively immediately across the nation so they could go and fight narcos in problematic areas. The areas where narcos were fighting, both between themselves and with the army, became the most dangerous areas in Mexico. And I was happened to be living in one of them. I was born in Mexico City, but in 1999, my family moved to Monterrey because they thought it was a safer place to raise a family. By 2007, Monterrey became one of the deadliest places in Earth. I was 8 at that time. So I don't really remember the times before the war, because for me, the war against drug trafficking has been happening for as long as I can remember. My first memories were the news. We used to watch the news every day before we went to school. But even I, who never paid much attention to the news, could see that every day more and more murders and crossfires and shoot-bys were being reported. It came to the point that my mom said no more. She said, the morning is an awfully early time to hear about so much death. And she was right. She was right in trying to protect us. And at the start, it was only that, news reports. Because at the start of the problem was between the narcos and the people who lived nearby them. But it escalated. It escalated to the point that my city, a city of 5 million people have to live with the problem. At first, they started kidnapping us. It was only the rich, because they could pay big ransoms. They paid them and they were returned. But more and more, normal people were being kidnapped. People who literally had nothing, and they were expected to pay anything. They also stopped returning them. And those people were now called the disappeared. Because dead or alive, we didn't know where they were. 2 kids got kidnapped in my neighborhood. And suddenly I couldn't go outside to play anymore or walk to the street. Crossfires were happening more and more often. And the authorities were unable to respond because either they were too corrupt or too afraid to do something. Officials, high-ranking officials of both the government and the police were being kidnapped and executed because the narcos wanted to set an example that anyone who wanted to do something against them will be facing death to them and their families. We felt at the mercy of the cartels. Around this time is when the military arrived. At first, we feel more safe. I had one of these convoys stationed right in the corner of my street. But after the military came, if we thought that crossfires were a common thing before, after they came, it became an everyday affair. Murder became a common thing. Innocents were losing their lives due to loose bullets, and their only crime was to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kidnapping was so common that people would call you and pretend to have a person of your family. I don't know how many calls I have received of someone from the other side who claims to have my little sister, and that if I don't deliver the money by tonight, she will kill her. Fortunately for me, every time I have received one of these calls, my sister has been there with me. But this is not the case to everyone. We change as a society. People start living out of fear or under death threats. Just in 2016, 21,000 people had to leave their homes because of violence. People didn't want to go outside anymore. We had a curfew at 10, a self-imposed curfew, because we were in fear that something could happen to us. People didn't want to help anyone anymore because they had feared that this would get them involved. It got to the point that people were not cutting anyone in traffic because they were in fear that the person would come out and shoot them through the window. The narcos were controlling every aspect of our lives, and they knew this. Cartels work by imposing fear and violence. A turning point for me personally, it was when we started seeing narco messages. A narco message is a public execution that is left behind for other ones to see. And attached to the bodies, there is a message. As a kid, I didn't understand what the message was for or to who it was for. But now, I understand that the message was for us. It was for us to see and fear, because this is where hanged men left in the signs of the most important avenues, left at dawn so everyone who was going for the jobs would see them. We changed as a society because we normalized fear and we normalized violence. We did it as a necessity because we still had to go on with our lives, so we made it a part of our routine. I think that's the funniest part, that even when your life is as chaotic as this sounds, you still have to go out. I never missed a day in school. My father never missed a day in his job because life goes on. I think that was the worst thing that the cartels did to us. They made themselves part of our lives. I have heard that illegal drugs are a victimless crime, that buying them is a self-inflicted choice, and that smoking weed has never killed anyone. That is a lie. There are victims to illegal drug trafficking, but the buyer often never gets to see them. We were the victims of illegal drug trafficking. We, who now have to live in the middle of a war, and the life of many Mexicans is being defined by fear and violence. I'm not saying that buying weed is the same thing as killing a man. I don't think so. But at least we owe it to those who have suffered and those who still are, not to participate in funding an enterprise that has brought so much pain. Still, cartels are a big part of the issue, but just a part of it. The other part is how we have deal with them. As I said, in 2016, the war against drug trafficking started and the army was deployed. In 12 years, 201,225 persons have been murdered. I want you to remember this number because this is not a number. These are 201,225 persons who have lost their lives. And that is without mentioning the 30 to 50,000 who are now disappeared. It has been repeatedly pointed out that the measures taken in the government are directly responsible of the levels of violence that we're seeing today. And now, with a law that looks to formalize the militarization of Mexico, we are now in the need of trying to change the way we choose to fight. So far, we have concentrated in targeting specific drug lords. This is called the kingpin strategy. And this is a self-defeating exercise. Because in targeting specific drug lords, you're only creating a power vacuum. When a drug lord is arrested or killed, the cartel tends to fracture or it suffers a ruthless takeover by another. Fractured cartels are not weaker, they're more violent. When the war started in 2016, there were 4 active cartels in Mexico. As of 2017, there are 9. All of them fighting for their own control zones, fighting each other and affecting the people. And meanwhile, the military is employing strategies that resemble counterinsurgencies. The picture you see above, the lights on the top, they're a helicopter, a marine helicopter. And the red lights you see descending to the land, these are 50 caliber bullets who are being shot from the helicopter into a residential area. The objective of this operative was to kill the leader of the cartel Ventral Leiva. He died in this operative, as well as 14 others who were allegedly criminals. We don't trust institutions in Mexico, and we have reasons for it. The military has been repeatedly accused of violating human rights. They have been accused of forced disappearances, of torture, of rape, of unlawful executions. In trying to create peace, we have created more violence. And now we have to change the way we choose to fight. We have to understand cartels as they are. They are for-profit organizations. And once you have done this, you understand that you cannot kill the business by killing the people who run it. You must kill the business itself. We must look to alternatives that target 2 specific things: the way cartels make profit and the recruitment. We need to push for the legalization or the decriminalization of drugs because this will specifically target the way cartels are making profits. When I'm standing here and asking for the legalization of drugs, I'm not standing here and asking for my right to smoke freely. I'm asking for my right to live a peaceful life. The other thing that we need to remember when talking about cartels is that And I believe so in my heart. No one really wants to go out and kill for a living. But the people who are now participating in illegal drug trafficking are people who are often cast aside by society and have been marginalized by a system that offers nothing to lift them out of the circle of poverty. There are 8 million student-age Mexicans right now who are neither studying nor working. These are the type of people that have been targeted by the cartels, and they are the type of people we should be targeting as well. We have to make education accessible and attractive, because education is the large-scale mechanism to bring opportunity and change. When fighting cartels, we must remember that we're not only fighting criminals, we're also fighting necessity itself. And necessity cannot be killed, it can only be addressed. The last thing that I want you to remember is that the traffic of illegal drugs is a problem of two nations. Any solution that it can bring real solutions to our issues are bilateral ones. We must open pathways of communication between both nations, Mexico and the US. And they must be willing to go beyond just funding a war. Building a wall does nothing to address the crisis in Mexico, because building a wall will not decrease the demand of drugs from the US. We have to remember that the problem is for both nations. I know that what I'm asking here are changes that go beyond my comprehension. I know that it's easy for me to ask for the legalization of drugs without really comprehending the macro effects that it will have in a whole nation. I'm not the only one who has asked for bilateral solutions. I'm not the first one who has asked for better education and more opportunities. Quite frankly, there's nothing that has been said today that hasn't been said before. But I see a great value in urging to change the way we choose to fight. 12 years and 201,225 souls are testament enough that we have committed a mistake. Now, we're faced with the task of making sure that the next 12 years are spent fixing it. Thank you.